What if the galaxy decided you were no longer worth fighting for? Imagine being cast aside by the very universe that seems so vast, so full of promise. Picture it. Humanity, a young and vibrant species, suddenly abandoned by every other intelligent civilization, left to navigate the unknown alone. But instead of succumbing to the crushing weight of isolation, humanity did something unexpected. They chose to stand, to fight, and to protect what they could not afford to lose. This is not just a story of survival. It's a tale of defiance, of a species that refused to disappear into the cold, dark void of space. It's a story about humanity's fight against the odds, against a galaxy that had written them off as insignificant. Despite being abandoned, humanity did not shrink back. No, they chose to rise, to protect not just their own, but the very galaxy that had turned its back on them. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. But how did humanity go? From being a forgotten species to the defenders of the galaxy? How did they overcome the harsh rejection they faced? It all began with a single realization. They couldn't rely on others. They had to depend on themselves. The first few steps weren't glamorous. There was no grand fleet waiting to escort humanity into the fold. No, humanity had to build itself from the ground up, from the ashes of their isolation. The first steps were made by the pioneers, those who dared to look beyond the Earth, those who wanted to discover what lay in the stars. With their fledgling technology, they explored the unknown, each new world a challenge. And yet, with every challenge they faced, humanity adapted, learned, and evolved. They started building ships that could traverse the vast distances between the stars. They developed weapons, not to conquer, but to defend. They built alliances with the few who were willing to stand with them, those who saw humanity's potential, their indomitable spirit. And slowly, they began to carve a place for themselves in the galaxy. But it wasn't just technology or strategy that set humanity apart. It was their values. Where other civilizations had become jaded and power-hungry, humanity held on to something precious. The belief in protecting those who could not protect themselves. This guiding principle would become the cornerstone of their existence. Humanity wasn't interested in dominating the galaxy. They were interested in defending what was worth protecting. And that was what the galaxy needed. This was the defining moment, the realization that the very thing that had been cast aside, humanity's ideals, was exactly what the galaxy needed. Humanity's refusal to be discarded marked the beginning of something larger. They weren't just survivors, they were protectors. And their first real test would come when a ruthless empire, one that had oppressed countless worlds, set its sights on Earth. The galaxy's most powerful empire had conquered world after world, crushing those who dared resist. But Earth was different. Humanity was different. They weren't willing to bow down. They didn't see themselves as expendable. And when the Empire arrived to claim their world, humanity fought back with everything they had. Against overwhelming odds, they held their ground. They weren't prepared for an intergalactic war, but they fought with the heart of a species that would never surrender. They were fighting for their very survival, and they were fighting for the right to protect their future. In that moment, the galaxy was forced to take notice. The Empire underestimated humanity, believing them to be too small, too weak, to resist. But they were wrong. Humanity, with their ingenuity and drive, fought back fiercely. The battle was not won by overwhelming firepower, but by the sheer willpower of those who refused to be crushed by the weight of the galaxy's rejection. And in the end, humanity emerged victorious. Not only did they repel the Empire, they sent a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity had a place in this universe, and they would protect it at all costs. But this victory was just the beginning. What humanity didn't know was that their fight for survival had just triggered something much bigger. The galaxy had been watching, and now, other factions, both benevolent and hostile, would turn their eyes toward Earth. What would humanity do now? Would they keep standing alone? Or would they expand their reach, fighting not just for themselves, but for the future of the galaxy. As the dust settled from their first victory, humanity was left with a stark realization. The galaxy was vast, but it was not as friendly as they'd hoped. They had won their battle, but the Empire was just one of many forces vying for power and control. The galaxy was a place where strength ruled, where the most ruthless and cunning civilizations dictated the fate of entire worlds. Humanity had won the right to exist, but now they faced an even more daunting challenge: how to secure their place in the galactic order. The immediate aftermath of the battle was both a triumph and a burden. While humanity had successfully repelled an existential threat, they were still alone in a galaxy filled with dangers. The universe was not welcoming, not by a long shot. Other civilizations looked at Earth with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and, for some, outright hostility. Humanity's actions had made them a new player on the galactic stage, but this new position came with risks. They were no longer simply an insignificant species. They were a species that had dared to defy the odds, and that made them a target. But humanity wasn't going to back down. Instead, they doubled down on their commitment to protecting not just Earth, but any world that needed help. They realized that their survival depended on their ability to form alliances, to build relationships with others who shared their values. Humanity was unique. Its diversity, its resilience, and its unwavering belief in freedom and justice set them apart. Where other civilizations had grown stagnant, complacent, or self-interested, humanity still had the spark of hope and potential. It was this very hope that would drive them forward, and it would be the key to forming the alliances that would secure their place in the galaxy. The first steps toward a larger galactic presence came in the form of diplomacy. Earth's leaders, once isolated and concerned only with their planet's immediate future, now looked outward. They began forging alliances with neighboring systems, with species who were also tired of living under the oppressive rule of the larger galactic powers. These alliances were born out of necessity, but evolved into something deeper: a shared vision for a galaxy where freedom, protection, and mutual respect were the foundations of all interactions. Humanity's first ambassadors didn't just represent Earth. They represented a new way of thinking, a way that was about cooperation, protection, and standing up for what's right. But as they ventured further into the galaxy, they discovered that not all species were as welcoming as they'd hoped. Some saw humanity's rise as a threat, an upstart species that needed to be put in its place. The galaxy's power players, the ancient empires and well-established races, viewed humanity's idealism as naive, a fragile dream that couldn't possibly survive in the harsh realities of the universe. For them, the only way to ensure stability was through dominance, not cooperation. Humanity's insistence on protection, freedom, and diplomacy was seen as a weakness. In response to this, humanity was forced to evolve. They could no longer rely solely on diplomacy. They needed to prepare for the worst. Earth's military, which had been established for self-defense, now began to take on a new role: peacekeeping and deterrence. Earth began developing advanced technologies not just for defense, but also for rapid deployment of forces to protect its allies. Humanity's military was no longer just a defensive force. It was a symbol of strength, a signal to anyone who would threaten the fragile peace they were trying to build. The first real test came when the Krathar Empire, one of the galaxy's most powerful and aggressive factions, decided to test humanity's resolve. The Krathar had long controlled vast swathes of the galaxy, and they had no intention of letting a small upstart species like humanity challenge their power. They demanded that humanity surrender or face destruction. They assumed that, like every other civilization they had encountered, humanity would fold under pressure. But they were wrong. Humanity, with its newfound alliances and military might, stood firm. The Krathar sent their fleet to Earth, confident that it would be an easy victory, but they had underestimated humanity's resolve. In a series of intense battles, humanity's forces, working in concert with their allies, fought back with a ferocity and determination that shocked the Krathar. The Krathar had expected Earth to be weak, isolated, and unprepared. Instead, they encountered a species that had learned to fight not just for survival, but for something greater: the right to protect. After the victory over the Krathar Empire, humanity stood at a precipice. Their newfound strength had sent ripples throughout the galaxy, But the question remained. Could they truly defend what they had gained? Or would the weight of the galaxy's politics, ancient rivalries, and overwhelming power dynamics crush them? The fight against the Krather was not just a defense of Earth. It was the beginning of humanity's emergence as a galactic power. Yet, the aftermath revealed the harsh truth. Being a powerful species meant something entirely different in a galaxy teeming with ancient, secretive factions and imbalanced power structures. The first step for humanity was to solidify their newfound alliances. Earth had quickly become the nucleus of an interstellar coalition. Various species, once wary of humans, began to see the value in joining forces. These included the Zyra, a telepathic race who had suffered from their own internal divisions, and the Vakar, an ancient civilization with the ability to manipulate gravitational fields. Despite their differences, these species, like humanity, sought a new future. One where peace was possible. But even with these allies, the question of security loomed large. Humanity's leaders realized that peace could never be guaranteed, especially with so many powerful enemies waiting in the wings. The Krathar Empire was only one of many factions, some, even older and more dangerous, whose motivations remained a mystery. The galaxy was far from unified, and even though humanity had shown itself capable of standing firm in battle, their enemies were adapting. In this harsh reality, the only way to ensure lasting peace was to continue strengthening their position. But the problem was not just military. It was ideological. Humanity's greatest strength was its belief in freedom, justice, and protection. But these ideals were not universally shared across the galaxy. There were factions, some older than humanity itself, who believed in strict control, in enforcing their will through fear. The galaxy had long been divided between those who sought dominance and those who struggled for their freedom. While humanity championed the latter, their ideals weren't always embraced by their allies. Some of the very species they were working with had histories of conquest, and not all of them were ready to relinquish their long-held thirst for power. As Earth's leaders worked to build a coalition, they quickly realized that diplomacy was a delicate balance. One of their first tests came when they sought to bring the Jathar, a race of ancient warriors with vast fleets, into the fold. The Jathar had a reputation for ruthlessness, and while they had fought off invaders in their own territories, they were not interested in alliances for the sake of peace. They viewed the idea of collective defense as weak, something that could ultimately undermine their own power. Humanity's diplomats were undeterred. Led by Ambassador Kira Singh, they pushed forward with negotiations, emphasizing not just the tactical advantages of an alliance, but the ideals that humanity stood for. Kira understood that she was not just trying to convince the Jathar of their military worth. She was trying to convey humanity's vision of a universe where freedom was protected, where the right to self-determination was sacred. This wasn't a call to arms, but a call to honor the very thing the Jathar had fought to protect for centuries: freedom from oppression. The negotiations took months, but eventually, the Jathar agreed to a limited partnership. This wasn't a guarantee of lasting peace, but it was a crucial step forward. The Jathar were warriors at heart, and they understood the value of mutual defense, something that humanity was beginning to perfect. The alliance brought with it incredible military strength, and as the Jathar lent their fleets to humanity's cause, they sent a powerful message across the galaxy. Humanity was not a lone wolf. They were becoming a true power. But this victory came at a cost. Humanity had to learn the hard way that diplomacy, especially with powerful ancient civilizations, was never straightforward. Not all species were as willing to join the cause. The Dirith, a technologically advanced species with the ability to manipulate time, saw humanity's rise as a threat to their dominance. They had remained neutral in the previous conflicts, but the idea of humans becoming a galactic power was too much to ignore. The Dirith had long been a reclusive species, hidden in the folds of space and time. Their mastery over temporal fields made them nearly impossible to predict or combat, and they wielded this power with great precision. Their motivations were unclear, but it was known that they sought to maintain their position as the galaxy's true power brokers. The idea of humanity's rapid ascent, with its idealistic vision and newfound military might, threatened their carefully constructed world order. When the Dirith revealed their intentions to the galaxy, it sent shockwaves through the coalition. Some allies were frightened by the Darith's powers and their cryptic warnings about humanity's rise. They argued that humanity was stirring up trouble where none existed before. Others, like the Zira and Vakar, stood firm with Earth, supporting the belief that it was time to end the status quo, time for new voices to be heard, time for a new era of freedom. But the Darith were not easily swayed. They declared that humanity had become a dangerous force, one that threatened to disrupt the delicate balance of the galaxy. It wasn't long before the Darith began covertly sabotaging key installations on allied worlds, undermining military operations and causing chaos in the coalition. This was no longer just a diplomatic conflict. It was the beginning of an ideological war. Humanity's ideal of freedom was directly clashing with the age-old desire for control. The question now became not just about surviving the next battle, but about surviving as an idea. Was humanity truly ready to fight for freedom and justice? Or were they going to be silenced by the galaxy's established powers? But humanity would not be deterred. The lesson they had learned from their previous victories was clear. They could face down any foe. The Darith had underestimated humanity's resolve. The time for standing by and watching from the sidelines was over. Earth's leaders knew that the only way to protect the freedom of their people and allies was to continue fighting for what they believed in, no matter the cost. The war with the Darith had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as covert sabotage evolved into full-scale military conflict, a shadow war that stretched across the galaxy. The Darith, with their unparalleled mastery over time manipulation, had effectively paralyzed key human and allied military forces. Their temporal technology allowed them to rewrite the course of skirmishes, erase military advancements, and even alter the outcome of entire battles before they even occurred. In the face of such power, it would have been easy for humanity to collapse into fear, to give up their fight for freedom in the face of this overwhelming enemy. But humanity wasn't known for backing down. The idea of losing the fight for freedom, losing the right to self-determination, was something Earth's people could not accept. The thought of succumbing to the very control the galaxy had been living under for millennia was a fate they could not bear. So, humanity did what it did best. It adapted. They began to employ unconventional tactics that even the Darith had not anticipated. One of the most brilliant and unexpected strategies humanity utilized came from their experience with the Krathar Empire. Earth's military leaders had already learned that to face overwhelming force, they needed to create uncertainty and instability. The key was using the Darith's own temporal manipulation against them. Using advanced technology derived from their own early experiments with quantum mechanics, humanity developed a countermeasure, a temporal jammer capable of disrupting the Darith's ability to manipulate time. This was a game changer. With their time-bending abilities blocked, the Darith were no longer able to control the flow of battle in their favor. However, even with the temporal jammer, humanity knew this wouldn't be enough to win the war. The Darith were still a formidable foe, and their military strength, though reduced, was still immense. It was clear that victory could only come if humanity rallied the galaxy behind them, forming a coalition not just of planets and species, but of ideas. Humanity's vision was one of cooperation and mutual defense, not conquest. They needed to prove that their cause wasn't just about military might. It was about creating a future where freedom and justice weren't privileges, but universal rights. So, the next move was an unprecedented call to the galaxy. Join us or face extinction. The Darith had begun targeting entire star systems, erasing entire species in their bid to retain control over the galaxy. Their message was clear. If they couldn't have control, no one would. This brutal approach left the galaxy with a stark choice: unite with humanity to stop the Darith, or stand aside and watch as entire civilizations were wiped from existence. This was when humanity's resolve became undeniable. The battle for freedom wasn't just a human fight anymore. It had become the fight for every species that valued autonomy. And it wasn't just the soldiers on the front lines that had to make this stand. It was every scientist, every diplomat, every citizen of Earth, and every ally who had rallied to humanity's cause. It wasn't just about fighting back the Darith's forces. It was about proving that the will of the people could stand against the tide of galactic oppression. One by one, alliances were solidified, and even the most reluctant species began to join humanity's fight. The Zyra, with their telepathic abilities, coordinated secret strikes against Darith outposts. The Vakar, with their gravitational manipulation technology, lent their powerful warships to the cause, devastating Drith fleets in critical engagements. Even the Jothar warriors, once hesitant to fully commit, began to recognize that their values aligned with humanity's in this fight for freedom. The tides were turning, but not without immense sacrifice. For every victory humanity won, there was a price to be paid. Planets were destroyed, entire fleets were lost, and many of humanity's closest allies were left reeling from the Darith's savage reprisals. The war took its toll not just on the physical world, but on the psyche of the galaxy. Despair began to spread, but humanity, true to form, pushed forward. This is when humanity made a defining decision. They would not merely defend the galaxy, they would protect it from itself. The war against the Darith had evolved beyond a battle between species. It had become a philosophical war, a battle for the very future of the galaxy's ideals. The galaxy's failure to protect itself had resulted in the rise of oppressive regimes, ancient powers who would stop at nothing to maintain control. But humanity, now united with its allies, wasn't interested in ruling over others. They were fighting for the freedom of all. They were fighting for the chance to prove that the galaxy could be different, that they didn't need to live under the shadow of tyranny. But not everyone in the galaxy was willing to accept this new vision. There were factions that saw humanity's rise as a threat to their power. The Darith weren't the only ones who wanted to see humanity and their allies fall. As Earth's coalition grew stronger, other species who had long kept to the shadows of galactic politics began to take notice. The Gazar, an enigmatic and secretive race of beings with a monopoly on energy manipulation, began to quietly undermine humanity's efforts. The Gazar believed that the galaxy was better off remaining fractured, with power concentrated in the hands of a select few. The idea of a united galaxy, one where no species held dominion over the others, was anathema to their way of thinking. Gazar's influence was subtle at first. They infiltrated diplomatic channels, sabotaged trade routes, and spread disinformation across the galaxy. They stoked fear and doubt, suggesting that humanity's growing power was a danger to the very fabric of the galaxy. Their goal was simple: to divide the coalition, to weaken humanity's alliances, and to prevent the rise of a united galactic community. At the heart of humanity's efforts to counter this new threat was the leadership of Ambassador Kira Singh. She understood that this new challenge wasn't one that could be met with force alone. This was a battle of minds and ideals. Humanity needed to counter the Gazar's influence by not just fighting them in space, but by exposing their manipulation of the galaxy's populace. Kira knew that victory in this ideological war would be just as crucial as any battle in space. To do this, she would need to go beyond diplomacy and create something that the galaxy had never seen before. A new kind of alliance, one where information and transparency were the key to success. The battle for the future of the galaxy was no longer just about military might. It had become a battle of ideals. Humanity's influence continued to grow, and now, under the leadership of Ambassador Kira Singh, they found themselves at the forefront of a new kind of conflict, one where unity, transparency, and shared goals would determine the future of the galaxy. But to rally the galaxy against the deep-rooted forces that sought to maintain control, humanity needed more than just good intentions. They needed a system of communication and cooperation that would outshine the manipulative tactics of the Gazar. Kira knew that the first step to winning this ideological war was to expose the true intentions of the Gazar. The Gazar had relied on their secrecy, operating from the shadows to sow distrust and fear. Their ability to infiltrate and spread disinformation had been a powerful weapon against the growing human-led coalition. To counter this, Kira implemented an audacious plan: the creation of the Galactic Transparency Initiative. It was a bold move, a strategy that would place everything out in the open, making it impossible for anyone, including the Gazar, to manipulate the galaxy's information. The initiative was designed to ensure that every piece of data, every military movement, every treaty, and every alliance was publicly accessible, allowing all galactic citizens to see the truth for themselves. At first, the idea of such transparency was met with skepticism. There were many species in the galaxy, old powers who had long relied on secrecy to maintain control, who saw this as an attack on the very fabric of their existence. The Gazar, in particular, were furious. Their empire was built on control, on hiding the truth from others, and this initiative threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. To them, the prospect of having their shadowy dealings laid bare was an existential threat. They would stop at nothing to derail the initiative. The battle between the forces of secrecy and transparency became one of the defining struggles of the war. Humanity and their allies knew that without this initiative, they would never be able to ensure a lasting peace. Transparency was their weapon, and in the face of the Gazar's relentless sabotage attempts, they doubled down on their efforts. Kira and her team worked tirelessly to ensure that the initiative was put into place, knowing that the outcome of this ideological battle could determine the future of the galaxy. While the political landscape shifted in the war room, the physical battle against the Dirith and other oppressive factions continued to rage. Humanity, though still facing immense challenges, had managed to build an impressive network of allies. Their fleet, now bolstered by the combined forces of multiple species, had begun to systematically dismantle the Dirith strongholds across the galaxy. The once overwhelming forces of the time-manipulating Dirith were now on the retreat. Their soldiers, disoriented by the loss of their temporal advantage, began to fall back, unable to keep up with the fierce resistance humanity and their allies had mounted. But this wasn't just a military victory. Humanity's message was becoming clear. They weren't just fighting to preserve their own freedom. They were fighting for the freedom of every species in the galaxy. For too long, the galaxy had been under the thumb of ancient powers, like the Drith and the Gazar, who had sought to impose their will on others. Humanity's fight wasn't just for survival. It was for a new vision of the galaxy, one where cooperation and freedom were the core values. In the wake of the military victories, Kira's Galactic Transparency Initiative began to take root. The idea of transparency didn't just resonate with humanity's allies, it gained traction across the galaxy. Former enemies began to see the value in a galaxy where secrets no longer held power, where the people had the right to know the truth. Species that had long been isolated or oppressed saw the initiative as a beacon of hope. Slowly, the initiative began to unify the galaxy in ways that no one had thought possible. The Gazar, however, were not easily deterred. They knew that if the Transparency Initiative succeeded, their entire empire would be exposed. Their hold on the galaxy would slip away, and with it, their power. The Gazar's response was swift and ruthless. They launched a series of covert attacks, sabotaging the initiative's key infrastructure, assassinating key figures, and spreading lies in an attempt to turn the galaxy's people against humanity. They spread rumors that humanity's ultimate goal was not freedom, but domination, that the Transparency Initiative was a facade for a human-led galactic empire. But humanity was no longer fighting alone. As Kira's message of unity and truth spread, more and more species began to rally around her cause. The Jathar, whose warriors had fought alongside humanity on the front lines, threw their full support behind the Transparency Initiative, using their vast networks of intelligence to expose the Gazar's machinations. The Zira, known for their telepathic abilities, helped amplify the message, ensuring that the truth was disseminated to even the most distant corners of the galaxy. And the Vakar, with their superior warships and gravitational technology, provided the military might needed to protect the initiative's progress. The Gazar, despite their best efforts, could not stop the tide of change. Their secrecy was no match for the growing alliance of species united under the banner of transparency and freedom. As the war against the Dirith wound down, the galaxy's focus shifted. The battle for freedom had been won. Now, the real challenge began. Rebuilding a galaxy where every species could thrive on equal footing, where power was no longer hoarded by a few, but shared by all. The end of the war marked a turning point in galactic history. The once divided factions were now forced to reconcile, not just with the enemy they had fought, but with the consequences of their actions. The Gazar Empire, which had once held the galaxy in its iron grip, was unraveling. Its leaders either captured or in hiding, and its structures crumbling under the weight of its own lies. Yet, as their empire dissolved, a new galaxy was beginning to take shape, one where humanity stood at the center, not as conquerors, but as leaders, advocates, and symbols of the collective will. Humanity's role in this new order wasn't simply one of military might or diplomatic savvy. It was the embodiment of hope, the living proof that even when the odds seemed impossible, a single species could rise to defend what was right. And this message had reached every corner of the galaxy. The victory, however, was not easily won, and it wasn't without sacrifice. The war had taken a heavy toll on both humanity and their allies. Entire fleets had been lost, and many lives were given in the name of freedom. Yet, in the aftermath of the conflict, humanity's resilience stood out above all else. They had refused to yield in the face of overwhelming odds, and in doing so, they had earned the respect of species far older and more powerful than themselves. Now, with the galaxy in ruins and the dust settling, the hard work of rebuilding was at hand. Yet, it wasn't simply about restoring what had been destroyed. It was about creating something entirely new. Humanity's role as leaders was now cemented, but with it came the responsibility of uniting a galaxy that had long been fractured by war, distrust, and centuries of unchecked power struggles. The Galactic Transparency Initiative, which had started as a rebellious idea, had become the foundation upon which the future would be built. No longer would power be concentrated in the hands of a few, nor would secrecy rule the day. The galaxy was evolving into something entirely different. A galaxy where every voice had value, where every species had a seat at the table. Kira Singh stood at the forefront of this change. Her role had shifted from that of a war hero to a peacekeeper, a unifier of species. But it was a role she embraced fully. She understood the gravity of what was at stake. The Transparency Initiative was not just a diplomatic tool. It was a living testament to humanity's commitment to freedom, equality, and transparency. In the years that followed the war, Kira worked tirelessly with other galactic leaders to establish the Galactic Council, a governing body that would be based on equality, shared resources, and mutual respect. No longer would the Gazar or other oppressive factions hold sway over the galaxy. This new council would function on the principle that every species, no matter how small or insignificant, had a right to participate in shaping the future. However, as the council was established, it became clear that not every species was willing to embrace this new way of thinking. The remnants of the old powers, particularly those that had once been subjugated under the Gazar, were hesitant to trust humanity's new vision. They had suffered long under the shadow of secretive control, and while the Gazar had been defeated, the trauma of those years still lingered. Some of these factions saw humanity as no different from the Gazar, believing that their motives for leadership were driven by the same hunger for power. To address these concerns, Kira took a bold step. She called for a galactic summit, gathering of every species, large and small, to openly discuss their fears, hopes, and visions for the future. This was not going to be another political maneuver. It was an open and honest attempt to heal the wounds of the past and lay the groundwork for a future based on trust. The summit was held on the neutral planet of Arcanova, a world that had remained untouched by the war. The atmosphere was tense, filled with the weight of history and the potential for division. For many, this summit was the last chance to build a new galaxy, one where cooperation and unity could truly flourish. The summit was long and difficult. At times it seemed as though the very fabric of the new galaxy might unravel before it had a chance to fully form. But Kira's leadership and humanity's commitment to transparency prevailed. Over the course of weeks, every species was given a platform to voice their concerns. Human representatives spoke not as conquerors, but as fellow citizens, determined to ensure that no species would ever again be subjected to the kind of oppression that had defined the Gazar era. Slowly, distrust began to give way to understanding. Old enemies found common ground, and despite the immense differences in culture and history, a shared vision for the galaxy began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, of course. Even in this new galaxy, old rivalries remained, and not every species was on board with the idea of equality and openness. But the shift had begun. Humanity, through their sheer will and unwavering commitment to the ideals of transparency and unity, had ignited a spark that would continue to burn brightly for generations to come. They were no longer the outsiders. They were the unifiers. the champions of a galaxy that had been broken, but was now healing, one piece at a time. And it wasn't just political change that followed. Technological advancements, once hoarded by the elite, were now shared freely across the galaxy. The once powerful Darith, who had sought to control the flow of time itself, were now reduced to a fraction of their former strength. They, like the Gazar, had been brought to heel by the forces of unity and transparency. But while their power had been stripped away, there remained a question. What role would they play in this new galaxy? The truth was that the Darith's knowledge of temporal technology was still valuable, and humanity knew that they couldn't afford to burn bridges with every former enemy. As Kira had taught them all, this was a time of rebuilding, and sometimes that meant finding ways to work with former adversaries to ensure the stability of the galaxy as a whole. But that would come in time. For now, humanity's most pressing challenge was to maintain the momentum of their victory. The Transparency Initiative, the Galactic Council, and the commitment to shared prosperity were all fragile constructs, ones that could easily be undone if the galaxy's citizens weren't vigilant. In the years that followed, humanity stood as the beacon of hope, guiding the way for species across the galaxy. No longer would they be abandoned. They had earned their place among the stars, not by force of arms, but through courage, determination, and the unwavering belief that a better future was possible for all. The galaxy, as it stood now, was irrevocably different. It was not just a place of stars, but a living entity, shaped by the struggles, victories, and heartaches of those who inhabited it. In the wake of the Galactic Summit, it became increasingly clear that the path forward would require more than just the political agreements made in Arcanova. The galaxy was changing, not just in terms of governance, but in the very way its inhabitants viewed themselves and each other. And at the heart of this transformation stood humanity, forever marked as the species that chose to stand when the galaxy had turned its back. The challenges of rebuilding were immense, and there were still dark corners where ancient grudges festered. But what had been proven time and time again through the course of humanity's rise was that the old ways of oppression, secrecy, and violence were no longer viable. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's refusal to be a passive bystander. They had stood up to the Gazar, the Gental, and all the forces that threatened not only their survival, but the very fabric of the universe. Humanity had become the ultimate symbol of resistance. The species that didn't just survive, but thrived. Not through domination, but through courage, unity, and a refusal to accept the darkness that had once ruled the galaxy. Now, with the Galactic Council established and the principles of the Galactic Transparency Initiative firmly in place, the true test was not just about maintaining peace, but fostering genuine cooperation. The war had created temporary allies, but how could they ensure that these fragile bonds would hold up in the long term? How could humanity, having fought and sacrificed so much, continue to lead in a galaxy that was still deeply divided? Kira Singh, who had once been a simple soldier, had become the face of this new era. Her leadership was now not only tested in battle but in diplomacy. She became the living embodiment of what humanity stood for: resilience, adaptability, and the belief that a better future was possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. Her role was no longer simply that of a military leader, but as the galaxy's most influential peacemaker. Her voice, calm yet resolute, rang out across the council chambers as she helped steer the conversation from suspicion and division to collaboration and progress. Her work was far from over, but she was no longer fighting alone. The will of the galaxy had united behind her, and humanity. In the years following the war, this unity began to spread in ways that no one could have predicted. Other species, who had once been distrustful of humanity, began to see them not as conquerors, but as equals. This wasn't immediate, and it wasn't without its difficulties. There were still species that held onto their grudges, that clung to the old ways of thinking. But there were also those who saw in humanity something different, a spark of hope for a galaxy that had been ravaged by millennia of war and oppression. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their military prowess or technological superiority. It was in their ability to inspire others. In the wake of the war, the galaxy witnessed a blossoming of culture, science, and technological exchange. Species that had once been isolated, hoarding their knowledge, now began to share openly, realizing that their survival and prosperity lay not in standing apart, but in joining together. Whether it was the trillions, once sequestered in their remote systems, or the Fioran, with their centuries-old secrets, all began to realize that humanity's vision of unity wasn't just a dream. It was a blueprint for the future. This wave of progress wasn't confined to the political or scientific realms. Art, literature, and philosophy flourished as well. The galaxy, once consumed by violence, was now giving birth to a new cultural renaissance. Species that had fought bitterly for millennia now began to celebrate their differences, sharing their histories and learning from one another. Music, once fragmented by centuries of isolation, was now a universal language. Artists from across the galaxy collaborated, blending their styles and traditions into something entirely new, transcending their individual histories and forging a collective cultural identity that was more than the sum of its parts. In this new galaxy, humanity's influence reached even the farthest corners of space. From the outer rim, where ancient civilizations had once fallen into ruin, to the distant systems where isolation had kept species trapped in a never-ending cycle of war, the human influence was undeniable. The people of the galaxy, who had once believed they were beyond redemption, now looked to humanity as a shining example of what was possible when unity and transparency were embraced. But even as the galaxy began to heal, there were those who resisted the changes. Some of the older, more traditional species saw humanity's rise as a threat to their way of life. The Gazar, although shattered, had left behind remnants of their military-industrial complex, mercenaries and warlords that still operated in the shadows. They had seen the new peace as a weakness, a chance to rise again and reclaim their former glory. There were whispers of dark alliances and covert operations, remnants of the old guard trying to pull the galaxy back into the darkness they had once controlled. But these forces were not as strong as they once were, and humanity's vigilance ensured that they could never regain their grip on the galaxy. Humanity had learned the importance of collaboration, not just between different species, but between different factions within humanity itself. The war had shown that even the greatest of civilizations could crumble under the weight of division. And as the galaxy moved forward, humanity's most pressing task was to maintain this fragile peace, to ensure that the principles of transparency, unity, and equality were never compromised. Kira Singh knew that this was a responsibility that could never be fully relinquished. As much as she had hoped for peace, she also understood that peace was a constant effort, one that required unwavering commitment. The work was never finished. The galaxy was vast, and its history long. There would always be challenges, new threats, and old wounds to heal. But for the first time in millennia, the galaxy had hope, and it was humanity, standing at the center of this hope, that had made it possible. The galaxy had abandoned them, but humanity chose to stand, to fight, and to protect. And in doing so, they had not only secured their place in the stars, but had ensured that no one would ever again face the darkness alone.